The music was playing, and everyone was smiling. My stepsister leaned in and whispered, "He's here." I turned slowly, heart pounding. And there he was, the man we swore never to speak of. Sarah's perfect wedding smile cracked like glass. Her hand started shaking, so violently she dropped her bouquet. And that's when I realized, after 8 years of her torment, after 8 years of keeping her darkest secret, it was finally my turn to watch her world burn. I was 14 when my mom married her dad. Sarah was 17, confident, beautiful, and absolutely convinced that I was nothing more than dirt under her designer shoes. While our parents played happy blended family downstairs, Sarah made sure I knew exactly where I stood in the pecking order. It started with small humiliations. She'd accidentally spill things on my homework. She'd lock me out of the bathroom when I desperately needed it. She'd invite friends over and make sure they all knew I was just the charity case her dad had to put up with. But Sarah was smart about it. Always sweet as pie when the adults were around, always the perfect daughter. The real torment began when I turned 16. That's when Sarah discovered she had real power over me. She'd make me do her chores, threatening to tell our parents I'd been stealing from her room if I refused. She'd borrow my clothes without asking and return them ruined, then gaslight me into thinking I'd damaged them myself. She convinced our parents I was going through a difficult phase whenever I tried to speak up. But the worst part, she was methodical about breaking down my self-esteem. "You're so awkward," she'd whisper when no one was looking. "No wonder you don't have any real friends. Mom only married your dad out of pity, you know that, right?" Day after day, year after year, chipping away at me like water on stone. By the time I was 18, I was convinced Sarah was right about everything. I was nothing. I was lucky to even be tolerated in her house. I kept my head down, got decent grades, and counted the days until I could escape to college. And then everything changed the summer before my senior year. I came home early from my job at the local bookstore. They'd had to close due to a power outage. As I walked up our driveway, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked in the shadows behind the garage. My parents were at work, so I figured maybe Sarah had a friend over. But something felt off. The house was too quiet, and Sarah's car wasn't in its usual spot. I entered through the back door, planning to grab a snack and head to my room, when I heard voices coming from the living room. Sarah's voice and a man's voice. A much older man's voice. I crept closer, my heart pounding. Through the slightly open door, I could see them on our couch. Sarah, 19 and supposedly single, was wrapped around a man who had to be at least 40. He was wearing an expensive suit, had salt and pepper hair, and a wedding ring that caught the afternoon light. "When can I see you again?" he was asking, his hands wandering places that made my stomach turn. "Richard, you know we have to be careful," Sarah purred, completely different from the sister I knew. This Sarah was sultry, manipulative, calculated. "If anyone finds out about us..." "My wife suspects nothing," he assured her. "And the money I've been giving you should keep you comfortable while you figure out your next move." That's when it hit me. Richard, as in Richard Morrison, our dad's boss at the engineering firm. The man whose house our family had been invited to for barbecues. The man whose wife, Patricia, had been nothing but kind to me. The man who had a daughter my age. Sarah was having an affair with a married man old enough to be her father. A man who was essentially paying her to be his mistress. And she was doing it in our family home, on our family couch, while our parents worked to support us both. I should have left. I should have backed away quietly and pretended I'd never seen anything. But I was frozen, watching the stranger who looked like my stepsister manipulate a married man with the same cold calculation she'd used on me for years. That's when Sarah looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. The color drained from her face. Richard, realizing something was wrong, turned around and spotted me too. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Sarah's survival instincts kicked in. "Oh my God," she said, her voice taking on that innocent tone I knew so well. "This isn't what it looks like. Richard was just helping me with something." But Richard wasn't as practiced at deception as Sarah. His face was pure panic. He knew exactly how this looked, and he knew exactly what would happen if his wife, his boss, his entire life found out about this. "Sarah," he said quietly, "we need to talk about this." That night, after Richard had left through the back door like a criminal, Sarah cornered me in my room. You didn't see anything, she said, her voice deadly calm. You understand me? Nothing happened today. Sarah, this is wrong, I whispered. He's married. He has kids. His wife. His wife is a boring old woman who stopped caring about him years ago, Sarah snapped. And what Richard and I do is none of your business. But Dad works for him. If anyone finds out— No one is going to find out, Sarah said, stepping closer. Because you're going to keep your mouth shut. You know what happens to tattletales in this family. I stared at her, confused. What do you mean? Sarah's smile was cruel and knowing. I mean, remember what happened when you told Mom I was sneaking out junior year? She didn't believe you. Remember when you tried to tell Dad I was stealing money from Mom's purse? He didn't believe you either. Face it, little sister. Nobody believes you because nobody trusts you. My stomach dropped. All those times I tried to expose Sarah's behavior, all those times our parents had dismissed me as jealous or dramatic. Sarah had been building this narrative for years. She positioned herself as the reliable one, the trustworthy one, while painting me as the problematic child who made up stories for attention. So here's what's going to happen, Sarah continued. You're going to pretend today never happened. You're never going to mention Richard's name. You're never going to hint about anything you think you saw. Because if you do, I'll tell everyone that you've been making up lies about me out of jealousy. I'll tell them you've been stealing from Mom's jewelry box, and I'll plant evidence to prove it. I'll tell them you've been sneaking boys into your room, and I have photos that could be interpreted that way. By the time I'm done, you'll be the one they don't trust. You'll be the one they send away. I realized in that moment that Sarah wasn't just mean. She was dangerous. She'd been collecting ammunition against me for years, just waiting for a moment like this. Do we understand each other? She asked. I nodded, terrified and defeated. And for the next 3 years, I kept my mouth shut. Even as Sarah's relationship with Richard continued, even as she started receiving expensive gifts that she claimed came from work bonuses from her part-time job, even as I watched Patricia Morrison at family gatherings, completely unaware that her husband was betraying her with a teenager. But Sarah didn't stop torturing me just because I was keeping her secret. If anything, she got worse. Now she knew she had complete power over me. She could humiliate me, borrow my things, make me do her bidding, and I couldn't say a word because she held the nuclear option over my head. Clean my room, or I'll tell Dad you've been going through his desk, she'd say. Give me $40, or I'll tell Mom you've been lying about staying late at school. Cancel your plans and drive me to the mall, or I'll make sure everyone knows what a jealous little liar you really are. 3 years of this. 3 years of being her personal servant, her emotional punching bag, her secret keeper while she lived a double life that made me sick to my stomach. I thought college would be my escape, but even there, Sarah found ways to reach me. She called just to remind me that she was still in control. She'd post pictures on social media of her and our parents looking like the perfect family, with captions about how some people just couldn't appreciate what they had. She made sure I knew that even though I was physically gone, she still owned me. And then, last month, everything changed. I was home for winter break, trying to avoid Sarah as much as possible, when Mom asked me to help her clean out the attic. While sorting through boxes of old documents, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a letter from Richard to Sarah, dated just 6 months ago. In it, he talked about leaving his wife, about setting Sarah up in an apartment of her own, about the future they were planning together. But the letter had been returned to sender. Apparently Sarah had moved without giving him her new address. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the second letter in the same envelope. This one was from Sarah to Richard, and it was brutal. Richard, it read, I think you misunderstood our arrangement. This was never about love or some fantasy future together. This was about money, gifts, and experience. I'm 22 now, not the naive teenager you met 3 years ago. I've outgrown you, and frankly, I've outgrown the need to pretend I care about your midlife crisis. Don't contact me again. Also, you might want to be more careful about your wife's suspicions. Patricia called me last week asking questions. I didn't say anything, but I can't promise I'll stay quiet forever unless, well, let's just say your severance package should reflect your gratitude for my discretion. Sarah hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been running a calculated blackmail operation. She'd used Richard, bled him dry, and then threatened to expose him unless he paid her even more money. I sat in that dusty attic, holding proof that my stepsister was capable of destroying lives without a second thought, and I realized something. I wasn't the only victim here. Patricia Morrison was a victim. Richard's children were victims. Even Richard himself, pathetic as he was, had been manipulated and used. But more than that, I realized Sarah had made a crucial error. She kept evidence. Written evidence. Evidence that proved she was a blackmailer, a homewrecker, and a master manipulator. For 3 years, she'd held my secrets over my head. Now I held hers. I made copies of everything and put the originals back exactly where I found them. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Sarah announced she was engaged to Jake Morrison. Yes, that's right, Richard's son. The son of the man she'd been blackmailing. The son of the woman whose marriage she'd been systematically destroying. Apparently, Sarah had met Jake at some young professionals event, and they'd been dating for 6 months. Jake had no idea about his father and Sarah's history, of course. How could he? Sarah was an expert at reinventing herself. But here's the beautiful part. The wedding was going to be huge. Both families invited, including Richard and Patricia. Sarah was so confident in her ability to control the narrative that she was literally planning to marry into the family she'd been manipulating for years. That brings us to yesterday. My cousin Emma's wedding reception, where both the Morrison family and ours were guests. I'd been watching Sarah all evening, waiting for the perfect moment. She looked radiant, playing the role of the blushing bride-to-be, accepting congratulations and acting like the sweetest person in the world. Jake was clearly head over heels for her, and Patricia Morrison had been gushing all evening about how excited she was to have Sarah as a daughter-in-law. She's exactly the kind of girl we always hoped Jake would find, Patricia had told my mother. So innocent and genuine. If she only knew. I was nursing my 3rd glass of champagne, building up the courage to do what I knew I had to do, when Sarah sidled up to me near the gift table. "Having fun, little sister?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The wedding is beautiful," I replied neutrally. "I'm so glad you could make it," Sarah continued. "I know it must be hard for you, watching other people succeed while you're still figuring your life out." There it was. Even at someone else's wedding, Sarah couldn't resist taking a shot at me. "I'm doing fine, Sarah." "Of course you are," she said condescendingly. "You know, I was talking to Jake's family earlier, and they're all so impressed by how mature and responsible I am. Patricia was saying she's never seen Jake happier. It's amazing what happens when you find someone who truly appreciates you." The implication was clear. Unlike me, who would never be appreciated by anyone. But before I could respond, Sarah suddenly stiffened. Her fake smile froze on her face, and her eyes went wide with terror. "Oh my God!" she whispered. I followed her gaze across the crowded reception hall, and there he was, Richard Morrison, looking older and more haggard than I remembered, scanning the crowd like he was searching for someone specific. That's when Sarah grabbed my arm with desperate fingers and leaned in close. "He's here," she whispered, her voice shaking with panic. I turned slowly, heart pounding, and looked directly at the man we both agreed never to speak of again. The man whose secret had controlled my life for 3 years. The man whose son Sarah was planning to marry in 6 weeks. And that's when I realized, after 8 years of her torment, after 3 years of keeping her secret, after a lifetime of being made to feel small and worthless, it was finally my turn. "Sarah," I said quietly, "we need to talk." But Sarah was already moving, trying to disappear into the crowd before Richard spotted her. She'd clearly never expected him to show up at a family wedding, especially not when his son's fiancée was in attendance. I watched her panic with a calm I'd never felt before. For the first time in our entire relationship, I held all the power. I walked calmly over to where Patricia Morrison was chatting with some relatives. "Mrs. Morrison," I said politely, "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I have something important I need to discuss with you. It's about your future daughter-in-law." Patricia's face lit up with interest. "Oh, of course, dear. What about Sarah?" I took a deep breath, feeling 8 years of humiliation and fear finally lifting off my shoulders. "I think there are some things about her past that you and Jake deserve to know before the wedding." And then I told her everything. I showed her the copies of the letters I'd brought in my purse. I explained the timeline. I described the affair, the manipulation, the blackmail. I watched Patricia's face go from confusion to horror to absolute fury. By the time I finished, Patricia was shaking with rage. That little! She started, then stopped herself. Where is she? Where is that manipulative little snake? We found Sarah hiding in the bathroom, frantically trying to call someone on her phone. Sarah, Patricia said, her voice deadly calm. I think we need to have a conversation. Sarah looked up, saw both of us standing there, and knew immediately that her world had just collapsed. Mrs. Morrison, she stammered, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, Patricia interrupted. You're very good at explaining things, aren't you? Very good at making people believe whatever version of the truth serves you best. For the first time in 8 years, I watched Sarah's mask completely slip. Gone was the confident manipulator. Gone was the calculating blackmailer. All that was left was a terrified young woman who'd finally been caught. Please, Sarah whispered, don't tell Jake. I love him. I really do love him. Love him. Patricia's voice rose dangerously. You love him so much that you didn't think he deserved to know you had an affair with his father? You love him so much that you were planning to blackmail his family? You love him so much that you've been lying to him about who you really are? Sarah tried to run, but Patricia blocked the bathroom door. No, Patricia said firmly. You're going to sit right there while I call my son and my husband. And then you're going to explain to all of us exactly what kind of person Jake was about to marry. The next hour was the most satisfying hour of my entire life. I watched Sarah's carefully constructed lies crumble one by one. I watched Jake's face transform from confusion to betrayal to disgust as he learned the truth about the woman he'd planned to spend his life with. I watched Richard arrive and face his family's wrath as his own secrets came to light. But most of all, I watched Sarah experience something she'd never experienced before, complete and total powerlessness. For the first time, she couldn't manipulate the situation. She couldn't charm her way out of trouble. She couldn't threaten or blackmail or gaslight her way to safety. All her weapons were useless because everyone could finally see her for exactly what she was. The wedding was called off that night. Jake gave Sarah back her ring and told her he never wanted to see her again. Richard and Patricia are getting divorced, but at least now Patricia knows the truth and can make her own choices about her future. And Sarah tried to convince our parents that I'd somehow orchestrated the whole thing out of jealousy. But the evidence was overwhelming, and even she couldn't spin her way out of written confessions and documented blackmail. She moved out of our parents' house the next day and hasn't spoken to any of us since. I know some people might think I should feel guilty about destroying her life. But I don't. For 8 years, Sarah made me believe I was worthless, unlovable, and unworthy of basic human decency. She used my secret to control me, manipulate me, and break me down piece by piece. But in the end, her own secrets were so much worse than mine. And when she finally pushed me too far, when she couldn't resist one last moment of cruelty, I realized I didn't have to live under her shadow anymore. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts or the police or some cosmic force. Sometimes justice comes from simply refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your worth. Sometimes justice comes from finding your voice and using it when it matters most. And sometimes justice comes from watching a blackmailer learn that everyone has secrets, and eventually they all come to light. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. It really helps the channel grow, and I have plenty more stories about moments when the underdog finally gets their day.